Hello everyone, welcome to Primetime Recaps. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It will make us happy and help us keep making videos like this. Today, I'm going to be explaining a movie titled Men of Honor, released in the year 2000. The movie begins somewhere in a small community, as we see a young African-American boy named Carl, who resides with his parents. Every day, he watches his father, Mac, work very hard as a corn farmer, and he always feels sorry for him. He decides to take the first approach to assist him. At first his father did not agree, because he's of the opinion that Carl should focus his attention on his studies. Mac is dead set against his son being like him, but he eventually agrees for the main time because Carl is determined to help him. After some years later, Carl is now a grown man who's working in the garden. Just in time, his mother informs him to get ready for his journey. It shows that today is Carl's departure day to be a part of the United States Naval military training. Before boarding the bus, unhappily his father makes him promise not to return to the village again, because he wishes for his son to focus on work and be prosperous and wealthy in the city without thinking of the family's responsibility. His father hands over a radio to him before leaving. As Carl arrives at the military base, they made him a cook instead, because at that time the American military didn't allow black people to join the military, due to the belief that black people are slaves who have to work under the white men. As the next scene opens, Carl and his friends watches a white student in their class swimming, as his friend informs him that the white people have a different schedule from the black people in swimming. As soon as he heard it, he wondered because they're all human and doesn't feel that it's right that way. He then decides to partake in swimming without thinking, but as soon as he approaches them, instantly, everyone including the captain of the ship makes jest of him. The captain even orders his assistant to expel him. After the incident, he has been locked up in the punishment room. As the captain of the ship comes to visit him, he tells Carl that he is impressed by his speed in swimming. Luckily for him, the captain then places him in the rescue swim team. Hearing this, Carl was very elated, and so he decides to inform his parents by writing a letter. The following day, they all witness a helicopter crash in the middle of the sea. Suddenly, out of fear, the ship's captain orders a diver to save the pilot of the helicopter. After a while, the diver finally makes it out, and his name is Chief Sunday. He is one of the divers with the rank of Master Chief in the Navy. Master Chief is known as the highest diving team. Although the pilot has been successfully brought out, but his life can't be saved, so a second diver is sent to rescue the co-pilot who is still in the sea. Only one diver can save one person, because in that year the diver's clothes weighed more than 200 kg. As the second diver goes down, the safety rope breaks, and this causes the diver to suddenly fall to the bottom of the sea. Without wearing a wetsuit, Chief Sunday then quickly jumps in to save him. Eventually, they both shrugged to survive. Due to the incident, he has been admitted to the hospital because his lungs is severely injured. The doctor also warns him to stop dive again until he has fully recovered. Immediately he hears the doctor's result, he gets so furious, and he causes a scene there. The following day he was charged on trial to account for yesterday's commotion, where the entire military navy was present including Carl. The captain then decides to demote him to coach the dive team. As soon as the trial is over, Carl approaches the captain and begs him to be allowed to take part in the diving training at the headquarters. Carl says that he was happy to see that Chief Sunday was rescued yesterday, and now he is impelled to save people like Chief Sunday. Knowing how determined he is, the captain grants his request, and permits him to switch divisions from the swimming division to the diving division. As he arrives at the training camp the following day, the guard looks surprised as he gives him the letter of duty, because no black man has ever been allowed to enter the Marine base. Not so long, Captain Sunday drives out. It's certain that Chief Sunday will be the coach of the dive camp. Carl informs him the reason for being there, but instead he mocks him by saying that the black man doesn't deserve to be a diver. Listening to him, Carl decides to say nothing as Chief Sunday drives out. He continues waiting there until evening, As soon as Chief Sunday arrives, he seems tired of seeing Carl still outside the gate, so he offers to drive him back to his village, but Carl refuses, saying that he had promised his father that he would definitely become a member of the Navy. Seeing how determined he is, he eventually let him in the camp. One of the students named Snow Hill walked towards him. He seems like the only white man ready to welcome Carl irrespective that he's a black man. He informs him that the camp is led by a former Marine named Mr. Poppy. Snow Hill then takes him to his dorm, where we see a new white student who doesn't accept Carl's arrival, but when Chief Sunday enters the dorm, he notifies the students that Carl is now part of the student training. Afterwards, the other students leave the dormitory one after the other, saying that it's better to leave the Navy than to sleep in the same room with a black man, until Carl is left alone with Snow Hill. Later that night, Chief Sunday wakes Carl up and drags him out. He even sprinkles water on him and tells him that from that moment on, Carl should understand the position and he shouldn't be agile. He adds that because he decided to accept him, the white people now have issue with him. Carl is eventually able to survive the torture of the coach that night. During Carl's first training exercise the following day, Chief Sunday explains that there would be a lot of people failing in the first exercise, because there is a difference between swimming and diving. Snow Hill seems to be the best swimmer in his hometown, so he decides to test Snow Hill diving skills. He makes him fall inside the water. Snow Hill is not able to dive, so he quickly takes the guy out of training. Daily, Carl and other students continue to undergo their training until it's time for the results of the written exams. His grades are really poor, and the officer tells him that he'll be informed if the result of the next test is poor again, then he will be expelled from training. He decides to go to the city library to study during the semester break, where he meets a librarian named Joe, who is a student studying nursing. When Carl asks Joe to guide him study, she declines, saying that there are so many lessons to be learnt in the Navy, and it will take Carl months to understand. Seeing how determined Carl is, she eventually decides to guide him study and Carl finally gets good grades. Later in the day, Chief Sunday resumes teaching diving, and he orders 2 new trainees named Rourke and Eshar to welder the sunken ship. As Eshar is welding again, swiftly the ship moved until it almost fell into a ravine. Amidst the panic as Eshar's air hose gets stuck, everyone hears the 2 guys cry for help, and because they have no other choice, Carl then offers to save them. Chief Sunday then gives them 5 minutes to save the 2 of them, before they run out of air. While he's saving them, Rourke, who is scared, runs away from Carl. He gets angry, but he remains focused by continuing his mission of assisting Eshar and bringing him out unarmed. After the incident, Chief Sunday reads out the award issued by the Navy commander, but the award is given to Rourke instead of Carl, with how essential he has been in saving the lives of his colleagues. The commander isn't ready to acknowledge his services because he's black, and the other students who know how supportive he has been feel sympathy, and they gradually start getting closer to him. In the next scene, Carl puts a call across to his family the following day. While on the call, his mother informs him about the death of his father. As he hears the news, he feels so unhappy. His mother tells him that his father intentionally didn't inform him that he was ill, so that Carl can still focus on his studies and achieve his goals without worrying about the condition of his father who was so down. He then calls Joe to accompany him. As he's waiting, a woman approaches Carl while he is crying, and it turns out that she's Chief Sunday's wife. She tells him that they both have the same fate, because she's also sad that Chief Sunday chose to party with his partner instead on their wedding anniversary. She decides to invite Carl to go with her to the bar where her husband is having a great time, but as they get to the bar, a great number of the Navy stares at Carl and reports him to Chief Sunday. Suddenly, the chief rebukes Carl by saying that black people don't deserve to be there. Hearing these words, he becomes furious and dares to go against his coach for the first time. He tells the coach that he's jealous because he is better than him. As Joe enters the bar, she becomes confused about what is happening. Chief Sunday decides to challenge Carl to a breath-holding underwater race, and if Carl loses, the chief will remove him from the training camp, but if Carl wins, he'll let Snow Hill back into the camp. Carl immediately decides to accept the challenge because he's already fed up with the insults. Carl eventually won, and as he finishes the match, Carl becomes baffled as to the reason he didn't see Joe again immediately he won the challenge. He then chases her and then asks her why she left. She explained that she only came there to say goodbye, because she already got a job outside the city and will be departing tomorrow. Hearing about this, he is surprised. Then he proposed to her without thinking, promising her that he would come to see her after graduating training. The following day, Mr. Poppy invites Chief Sunday and tells him not to pass Carl in tomorrow's exam, because he doesn't want any black people to graduate from the camp. Although they both don't like Carl, but Chief Sunday disliked the way Mr. Poppy abuses his power for personal gain. After yesterday's incident, Chief realizes that Carl was much better than him. However, he can't go against the orders of the superiors, so he then passes the information to Carl and they both get into an argument, because Carl still wants to take the exam. The furious chief instantly slams the radio that his father gave him. Carl becomes sad because it was the only thing that reminds him of his father. Later the next day, as all the participants were getting ready, Carl surprisingly walks in, and as he stares at his coach, the chief eventually had no choice than to permit him take the exam. As soon as the trainees are ready, the exam starts. From the surface, several people threw the bag containing the test kits into the water, but when it's Carl's turn, the bag was torn up on Mr. Poppy's orders. While in the water, he's still trying to find the equipment because he had no idea of the plan. The participants successfully completed the exam one after the other until only Carl was left in the water. Mr. Poppy, who examines the practical exam, then informs Chief to let Carl stay in the water until he can hardly breathe. There he had no choice than to concur with Mr. Poppy's orders, because his career is at stake. While Joe is at work having a bad feeling about Carl, she decides to rush off to the exam venue, and until late at night, Carl is still under the sea. The chief and other examinees now seem to start get worried. Mr. Poppy keeps yelling over the phone from afar, telling Chief not to help Carl. He eventually decides to go against the boss' orders amidst his worries, and quickly orders the other participants to raise Carl back to the surface, but when they try to pull, Carl suddenly rose to the surface, and he also passes. The following day at the graduation ceremony, Snow Hill comes to camp and informs Carl about the good news and the bad news. He says that the good news is that the Navy has decided to let him take up diving training again, and the bad news is that Chief Sunday has been fired for disobeying Mr. Poppy's orders and passing Carl. He becomes quiet as he starts packing his things on the bed. He is astonished to see his father's radio intact. It only indicates that Chief Sunday fixed it. After some years later, Carl is now a senior diver in the Navy. He is married to Joe and they now have a son. He is currently carrying out the greatest mission in the United States, in search of a nuclear bomb that sank on the seabed. The commander informs him that when the bomb explodes, the result can make an entire region get completely destroyed. The commander first doubts that Carl can complete the mission alone, but instead, Carl tries to prove himself. Carl, who uses to be treated so badly because he is black, is now a hero who's being broadcasted live across America. The commander then orders the other members to bring the bomb on board, but an accident with the winch on deck causes the lines holding the bomb to snap. Carl shoves other deck hands aside, but his own leg is caught by the snapped wire. Carl wakes up later in the hospital with Joe by his side. He is shocked to see that he is in the hospital, but Joe explains to him that because of yesterday's incident, his leg was damaged by the impact, but doctors think he will not walk normal again. Hearing this, he becomes devastated, and he feels bad for failing his father. Meanwhile, Chief Sunday is now in a rehab clinic undergoing detox for alcoholism. The following day, as he's sitting alone, a nurse gives him a newspaper, and in the paper, he finds out about Carl's accident, and as his former boss he feels compelled to visit him. While still in the hospital, the commander and his assistant visits Carl, and after a while, the naval captain named Hanks also visits him. Carl pleads with him to allow him resume work when he recovers, but seeing his current condition, Captain Hanks unwillingly informs him that he will never be able to dive again. Hearing this, he then shows him a newspaper story about a proud Air Force pilot who only has one leg. He then requests for only few weeks to prove that he is also capable of performing his duties and making the Navy proud. He also told the doctor to amputate his leg to enable him to continue his mission. As soon as they leave, Joe, who overheard their conversation, immediately questions Carl about his selfish and reckless decision and opposed it. Carl is now in a fix whether he should give up on his dream and just live a normal life with his beautiful family or keep pursuing his dreams. Afterwards, he eventually decides not to give up on his dream. Whilst recovering from surgery, he begins the practice of living with one leg. As he falls down, Chief Sunday walks in and informs him that when he read the news about his accident yesterday, he just felt that their fate was almost alike. The first was that they were both slumped because they could not dive anymore, but as his former boss, he knew who Carl was and he knows that he never gives up. The chief then promises to convince the Navy officials to let him return to diving. He adds that he'll also help him recover gradually. A month later, Carl is now preparing to appear before the naval personnel in a conference to determine Carl's fate in the Navy. Surprisingly, Chief Sunday has been ordered not to enter the courtroom by Captain Hanks. As Carl answers few questions in the courtroom, the captain orders one of the guards to bring a wetsuits and then challenges Carl to walk 12 steps in the suits that weighed more than 200 kg, and unassisted, then he will permit him to be a diver again. Whilst still outside the room, the chief threatens the guard to let him in. He eventually allows him out of fear. As he walks in, he is astonished to see them telling Carl to wear a wetsuit weighing more than 200 kg. Then Carl sees that his wife and son has just arrived to witness the happening. Chief pleads with them to be lenient, as he explains that ordinary people find it difficult to walk in it, let alone Carl. But still Carl continues to reassure the chief boldly that not having a complete leg is not an obstacle for someone to achieve his dream. As he sees his student's determination, Chief helps Carl suit up and then proceeds to coach him through the ordeal. As soon as he's ready, Carl stands up in the new suit, and with obvious discomfort takes his steps. Carl struggles but keeps moving forward until he has reached his 12th step. As Captain Hanks and all the higher-ups sees Carl's effort, they announce that the Navy will be reinstating Carl to full diving duty. Immediately, the crowd stands up and happily applauds him for successfully completing the challenge. As the movie ends, Chief Sunday feels that his duties as a teacher is now complete, as the both of them salute one another and Chief Sunday marches out of the courtroom. I hope you like the movie. Please turn on the bell icon to be the first to watch videos when we post contents like this. You can also suggest a movie you'll love us to explain in the comments section. Thanks for watching.